welcome to That Career Coach podcast. Today, we are talking about how to be a successful leader with the Vice President of Innovation and Strategic Leadership Coach, Michael Steiner. He has a PhD in business psychology, specialization in executive coaching. Super excited to have him on the show. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Kendall, great to be here. Big fan. Love everything you're doing on IG and TikTok. So it's fun to sit down and talk to you today.
Awesome. I'm excited to have you. I feel like we're going to jump in and give like some really meaty tips to a bunch of our new and executive leaders.
Love it. Yep. Hopefully they're super meaty, right? Meatiest tips we can find.
The most we can provide. I love it. So what made you want to be a leadership coach in the first place? How'd you get into this?
Yeah, so it's twofold. Number one, I grew up. So I remember the first time that somebody told me I wasn't a great leader was actually in high school. And it was just this kind of story where I was part of a team for 4 years, and then it was supposed to be like a seniority thing where I was stepping in to be a coach, and they passed up on me for being a coach for a new guy who happened to already be the coach of the football team because of all of his leadership skills. And that's what they said. They said, hey, you don't really have it. And so that was like the first time and the last time I said, nobody's ever going to tell me to do that again. I'm going to figure out this leadership thing. And from there, it's, context. My dad was an entrepreneur, founded a company while also he did a lot of nonprofit work, ministry work. And so he always was leading teams. And so I always looked up to him and how he's doing. So it felt like I've always been surrounded by people who were thinking about how to be a better leader. They were talking about it. I went to conferences about it, all that kind of different things. And so it was super natural for me as my education advanced and as my career advanced, stepping in, going from entry level into middle management and then into kind of that C-suite that there's a lot of things that I was learning that I just wanted to share with people. And so it honestly started super informally. I'd have friends or I'd have people I connected with. We'd be hopping on calls similar to this, talking about different ideas. And they would just be like, man, I'd love for you to do this more. How can I get more from this? And so kind of my coaching grew out of that. And it's been a fun ride ever since.
That's awesome. I used to work with a very senior executive who always said she had an accidental career. She just kept doing what she felt like was the right things until she ended up in a spot where that meant being an executive. And I always think of that with my own coaching, that I have a very similar path. I just wanted to help people avoid mistakes I had made. And started helping. And then all of a sudden people are like, wait, what if I wanted to refer you to 100 of my closest friends? And then, the rest is history. So it's always good to hear kind of what makes it yours.
Let me ask you this. Do you find you were the kind of person that was always giving advice, like even when it was kind of inappropriate?
I would say I'm definitely not afraid to share my opinion. Maybe that's the right way to put it. Right. Yeah. No, I feel like the more of us I meet and the more I'm kind of entering into this executive coaching space and career space, it's that same kind of theme, right? Like, you were giving advice to your mom and your dad from the backseat of the car and they were like, guys, you could chill out. So it's just one of those things when you have it, like you just can't help but share it with people to help them from there. So for better or for worse sometimes. Yeah. And it's so funny that you say that. My daughter is a horrible backseat driver. She's 5, by the way. She can get you anywhere in the state. And we always joke, like she will either be a CEO or run a gang. And there's probably no in between for her because she's going to be a leader. It's just, will it be for good or for evil kind of split of how she applies that skill set. So it's funny to hear that you did the same thing. Is the number one most important thing that you drive your leaders to do when you're working with them?
Yeah, so it's the way I like to coach is I coach around insights. And so what I found is most leaders have tons of strategy. They've got tons of different things that they know they should be doing. But they're not for whatever reason. And those are the things I'm most curious about. Like, why are you not doing the things you already know that you should be doing? And so what we do when we're working together is I try and find those insights, and that's through different conversations, unpacking their different beliefs, their mental models, the way they think about the world. We all have this thing that we call in the science and psychology, it's called immunity to change. So immunity to change is the things that keep you from actually changing. So there's a perfect example of this research where this guy, they did all these different studies where they had this pill that was supposed to help reduce heart failure, and it had no side effects, and all you had to do was take it every single day and refill it. And after a year of studying the patients, only 50% of them actually did it, even though it's concrete, it's going to save your life, it's everything. And when they were asking different people why they weren't changing it, they said, no, I know what to do. I just don't know why I'm not changing it. And when they dug deeper, what they found is, like this one example, this 58-year-old man said, I don't like taking it because it makes me feel like I'm 65 years old and I've got one foot in the grave. I'm in the prime of my life, and I just hate feeling old. So even though this pill was saving his life, he was afraid of taking it because of how it made him feel. And leaders have so many of those different things. And that's one of my favorite things to kind of unpack as a coach.
And it's so interesting that you bring that up. With my book club, we had read The New Extraordinary Leader in February. And one of the things that they talk about is that to be a great leader in like the upper middle management, lower executive level, you can have a myriad of different leadership skills. But to be a true executive, you have to have change management.
Yeah.
If you are not able to lead through change and to push change to your teams effectively, both taking the constructive criticism for that and the implementation, that's where you'll stick. Is all of a sudden, like, you can be a great leader and get to a certain level, but if you can't enact the changes you should be doing, then all of a sudden you'll start to kind of slow down in your growth and progression.
Right. And the worst thing, the growth and progression of your team. And that's in the companies, the places that you serve, and the halls of corporate America are filled with places that haven't changed since the 90s because they haven't let themselves grow. You can only grow and change to the level that you yourself are growing and changing. So it's huge. It's a great book.
And I think it's so interesting that, post-COVID, obviously COVID shook the corporate world, right? How many years have people been talking about remote work? And it was an impossibility until all of a sudden it was a requirement. And we're seeing a lot of changes in how people interact with their teams, they interact with their leaders, and it's leading to more of this, the quiet quitting phenomenon. In working with leaders and executives, what is something that you think they could do that would kind of prevent that quiet quitting, limit it? Like, how do they lean in to make sure their teams are engaged?
Yeah, it all starts with the vision that you're casting. It really does start. And that's vision casting is such a corporate-ese, right? It's one of those corporate phrases that we follow around. But at the end of the day, people will follow you and are motivated to change if they think you're leading them to a preferred future.
True.
And so you have to articulate that, you have to grow that, and you have to keep reminding them of it every single day because when the emails start flying in, when the projects start coming in, when the workplace drama starts piling up, it's so easy to forget where people are going. And in the leadership space, there's this big argument, right? Which is better, strategy, vision, or culture, right? And Peter Drucker and different people were famous for saying that culture trumps both of those every single time. But at the end of the day, you don't have a culture unless you're going somewhere together. Like the rallying point of a culture is we're on a team together moving forward. And the best way I could think about vision, and I talk about vision when I'm working with it, is my mentor, one of my big mentors, always talked about how the ending scene in Finding Nemo, right at the end, right, is this perfect picture of what leadership is, right? The fish are being pulled up in the nets, and the sun, Nemo's lost in there, and they're all in there, and all of a sudden they start chanting, "Swim down." Right? If everybody can just start swimming down together. And so in there, you see all the different pieces of leadership coming together, right? Change management, telling everybody, convincing them across the board, getting them to start saying the mantra and then behaving against the mantra. And all of a sudden they do this, what seemed to be like an impossible task, breaking the fishnet. And that's the power to me of vision. And when you're talking about getting people to have more meaning and purpose in their career, not quit what they're doing, it's all about connecting them with that vision, and then having the honesty to realize when they're not going to make the connection. And that's the bigger thing right there too, is if you're casting vision all the time and they're still disengaging, then you've got a disconnect that you're not going to solve by corporate ease, throwing more money at people, throwing more vacation time, all the different things that we do from there.
Yeah. No, and I love that analogy of the net because I feel like I've lived it. Where I'm Nemo, but no one is listening. And I'm sure many executives feel that way, right? Where they're like, no, we're just going to do this thing. And everyone's like, no, I don't want to. And it's so interesting in the corporate space. I talk a lot on my page that I truly believe there are like two big reasons that people leave companies. Either you have a bad manager who can't communicate to you what your growth options are, how you're upskilling, how you're going to develop yourself. They can't direct your career, or your company can't. Right? They don't have the finances to meet market rates, or they don't have the opportunities for you to progress within the company, and they hire from outside all the time. And that ties in so closely with the vision, because if the company doesn't have a vision of like, we're building retention, we're building good skills, we care about our people because we're going to deliver X, then the managers can't communicate that either. And that's when you start to see all those people, fall out of the system, for lack of a better term. And so often on social media, people will say, well, this is why I left corporate. And I'm like, yeah, but if it was working the way it's supposed to work,
right,
maybe you wouldn't have had to, but you get 3 or 4 bad leaders in a row, or work for 2 or 3 companies with no vision. And suddenly you're like, no, this is not sustainable.
Right. Well, and I'm always fascinated by this, and it's more of an urban myth than it is a reality, but the urban myth of like the startup where everybody's working 100 hours a week for peanuts, right? It's this glorified thing. Why? Because they have a shared vision. They're building something bigger.
Yeah.
In those situations, the myth goes that nobody's worried about all the different corporate things that we all struggle with in these big, kind of systems. Why? Because we're all doing something together. I can touch you. I can feel you. Everything that I do has an impact, and I'll take a pay cut because I know that what we have could be $1 billion unicorn one day if I just do another hour of work. And the bigger corporations get, the harder that becomes to recapsulate. And you find little pockets, right? You find little divisions that feel that way. And when you get into them, it's super energizing. It's awesome. But the bigger thing is just kind of monolithic. And it's tough, man. It's just kind of to me, that's the natural cycle of nature. You can see that across the board. And we could go really deep on that. It's just that vision. The minute you get, and that's, I think, when I think about managers specifically, they're in this unique spot where, they can't affect system-wide change, but they're responsible for leading like they are, right? And so it takes a really unique personality that can actually do that. They can actually lead like they're affecting system-wide change with the knowledge that most of the time they're not.
Yeah. And I love that earlier you had brought up impact, because something I work with my clients on a lot is, what are your passion statements? What is it that really makes you feel energized at work? And my big one in my career is I have to be making an impact, and I have to be able to see that impact. Yeah. So if you put me in a position where I'm going to deliver a bunch of work, but it's not going to drive an impact, I'm not interested. And as a result, I generally end up in that microcosm team that's got a vision, that's got a purpose, that's driving impact, because in an interview, anything else to me just sounds boring and there's no way I'm going to stay engaged. And so I love that, like, your vision and your impact, they kind of become one and the same. Like, how are you leading people to the value that you add, whether that's to your internal employees or your external stakeholders?
Yeah. And one of the things you posted a couple times, and I think we commented on it on Instagram, is about this idea of alignment, right? That you have to have that alignment. And so much of burnout and everything across the board is because the company isn't aligned to itself, or you're not aligned to that company, either by your skill or your purpose. And I think that's super powerful. Let me ask you this: when you are interviewing, right, and you're trying to understand that, what are those kind of pieces that you're looking for that let you know, okay, no, this job is in alignment with me?
Yeah. So I always focus on what my skills are. And I feel you have to have skill alignment with skill need, right? So I've worked for everything from startup size companies to like some of the biggest companies in the world. And the companies where I am most successful are the ones where they need the skills I have, right? It's a lot less about title or what the work is, but like, do you have that skill match? And for me, my skills are, I can translate. You can stick me in the room with the CEO or with the frontline employee or with marketing or with the business, and I may say 4 different things, but what they hear is the same thing. And that combined with, I can learn things very quickly, right? So if it takes 3 months to onboard in a job, probably takes me 4 days. Like I can get up really
Yeah.
quick and start
Yep.
doing fast. So if you're a company that needs somebody who can learn things really quick and start implementing change fast while working with lots of different stakeholder groups, I'm a great fit. If you need somebody who can do something that's very detail oriented, very specific, I'm not going to be your gal because that's not where that skill is for me. So when I am interviewing for positions, I want to make an impact, but I'm only going to be able to make an impact if I can use the skills that I think are my strongest. So a lot of what I do is in this role, what does the stakeholder engagement look like? What groups are you going to be interacting with? Do new projects come along rapidly, or are they more like a slow burn where we're doing the same thing most days and changing every once in a while? Because that's going to help me assess, do my skills fit? Because that's the only way I'm going to be able to work and lead effectively, right? And I've been in senior leadership for quite some time. And when I work with my teams, if I can't make an impact, it's really hard for me to encourage them to make an impact and for them to grow. So your leaders at the top of the house also have to be in alignment with what the company needs, or you end up with a mismatch. And a mismatch in like the CFO or the CEO, that's a problem, right? All of a sudden you've got a big culture disconnect.
Yeah, it's huge. And that's why you've got to be writing down what you do. Like, and you encourage your followers to do this all the time. If you're not reflecting on like what you've done and trying to pull out those themes of like, I've done this because I'm skilled at this, because I'm good at this, and like articulating that across the board and then marrying that with a purpose, right? That's deep work that 80% of people have never done in their lives. Like if there's one thing your listeners could take advantage is like, if you have to take a whole weekend away from everybody to like digest your life and turn it into principles, do it. That's probably the highest ROI thing you could possibly do across the board from there. And it's important. It's what we start for. That's why we coach. That's why we get into it, to help people discover that.
And it's always interesting because I feel like if you ask somebody, what makes you the right employee for the job, right? That's a very common interview question, even all the way up to the C-suite. As the CEO, what makes you feel like you're the right fit? And people always say something like, I'm very hardworking, or like, I'm dedicated to learning. And like, those aren't bad answers, but lots of people are hardworking and lots of people are, interested in learning new things. What do you do that makes you different than everybody else I'm going to bring into this interview? And if you can't articulate it, it's going to be really hard to scale your career and even find the right fit. Maybe you get the right title, but at a company that's not the right fit, and that won't last long either.
Right. And that's why everybody all the way up to the CEO deals with like imposter syndrome. Something that we've been talking about a lot lately. As long as you haven't articulated what value you actually offer, you're always going to feel like you're impostoring. Right? Because you're doing these kind of things, you're putting these generic questions right there. And so you just got to spend that time. It takes deep work. It really does.
I'd love to double click on that comment that you just made about imposter syndrome. Something that has been coming up that my followers have asked for a lot is kind of the difference between the executive inner voice versus the executive outer voice, right? To the public, a lot of the time, C-suite seems very confident, like they know what they're doing, that they're making the right decisions, right? That's part of their job. Is the inner voice different? Do you have people in leadership who are questioning every decision they make? What does that look like from your perspective, having coached them?
Yeah. So between coaching them and between serving as chief of staff, right? So in both scenarios, I've worked with them at both levels. I promise you, the same principles that make you confident at entry level, middle manager are the same principles that make you confident at the top. And if you haven't done that, you can absolutely manage your way into the C-suite without even realizing why you're there. And I've literally met and worked with, executive presidents who are, in the back room and they're like, I have no idea why I'm here. And at any moment they're going to discover I'm a fraud. And it's like, you just gave a 2.5-hour speech about the vision of the company and you're sitting there thinking you're a fraud. Like, but it's because you haven't done the deep work, right? And those inner voices are, so I'll give your followers an example of listeners an example of deep work, right? So every single negative voice that you have in your head came from somewhere else. You are not built questioning yourself. Questioning yourself starts from somebody else. And so if you follow the trail, you'll eventually find a point. And this is one of those powerful things that I ask in a coaching session is, who told you that first? So when somebody's telling themselves like, oh, I just don't feel confident talking in front of people. Who's the first person that told you weren't confident in front of talking? in front of people? Who's the first person that told you you sounded dumb? Who's the first person that told you that?
Interesting.
And all of a sudden it's like, oh man, eighth grade teacher, third grade teacher, my grandpa, my dad, who was all this kind of stuff, my mom. Actually, they never told it to me, but my mom said that to my dad. And it's so weird, right? Because you feel like
Yeah.
now we're in therapy, but this is how you move past it, right? Finding those voices, asking yourself, is that a voice you actually want to listen to? Now that you've uncovered it, you thought it was your voice. It's actually somebody else. Is this a person you want to listen to? Is this a person whose life you actually want to emulate? If not, then put them in the box and put it away. And let's start telling yourself a new thing internally.
Yeah. I absolutely love that because so often, I always joke my coaching sessions are 50% therapy, right? You want to complain, you want to like talk it all out. Great. That's what we're here for. But the other 50% is like tactically, how do you fix that? And I love that assessment of like, is this a real representation of me, or is this something that I was told by somebody that now I carry with me? Right. And I always think of the example, growing up, I was always told I was a lot. Like, love, you're just a lot. You're a lot for a lot of people. And that's true. I have a very big personality. I'm not afraid to give advice, unwarranted or not, share my opinion. And as I got older, what I realized was like, yeah, but that really empowers me to do what I'm doing now, which is to be a lot on behalf of my clients, to help them advocate for themselves, to help them build their careers. And so even if it is a negative and it was somebody else's voice, can you turn it into a positive that like, maybe you don't feel confident speaking in front of people, but maybe that's an opportunity for you to get stronger in that skill and you're going to expose yourself to it and you become a frequent speaker in front of large groups, right? I see that all the time. Like I used to be terrified and now I do it for a living. So I love that kind of assessment of where does the voice come from and how do you either use it to strengthen you or shut it out and start telling yourself something better.
Right. And I feel like we're living in this great golden age where people are actually open to asking these kind of questions, right?
Yeah.
Corporate, even 10 years ago, 12 years ago, this was taboo to like think about it. But now it's like, no, it's okay. And what we're realizing that is that the toys, the compensation, all those kind of things, they're great, but they're window dressing to a meaningful, purposeful life.
Yeah.
And so these are the questions that you actually have to do to get to that meaningful, purposeful life. And at the end of the day, if you're going to work somewhere, at least do it on purpose. And that's the end goal there.
I love that, like purposeful living, right? Of like, how do you do things on purpose? So when you're working with your various leaders and your clients, what are some of the things you want them doing on purpose? Like, how do you want them using their time wisely so that they're making the right choices?
Yeah. So what I tell a leader when we're looking, and one of the fun things to do is audit their time, right? We'll actually look at their calendar and we'll kind of break it down. There's a great book called Clockwork by a guy named Michael Michaelowitz. It's written for entrepreneurs, kind of small level business managers, small level business owners, but I use it scales. And he says there's essentially four main business activities that everybody does. You either do the work, you either decide what work to do, you delegate the work, or you design it. And so those are the four different buckets you can spend your work time in. And so when I look at a C-suite and executive level, and we're examining their time, what I always tell them is you need to be spending a big chunk of your time designing things. And designing work is about researching, understanding what is happening in the world around you, what trends you can have, all that. Because if change is going to happen, like we talked about earlier, change is going to start from a leader. Right? That's the leader's job. And so it's your job to live in the future of the company, of the organization, the team. That's why you're the leader. That's why people trust you as the leader, is that you are helping, right? You would hope, right? And that's kind of the basis of it is I'm going to make a decision that's going to lead us to a preferred future. So if you're not living in that future, if you're not actually like thinking about what's happening, trends, so 10% of your time needs to be spent reading, researching, getting into it, having new ideas. It takes space, it takes margin for that. And then from there, it's translating it, right? Spending one-on-one time building connections with your team from there. That's your lunches, that's your coffees, that's your unscripted, water cooler, or, if you're in a virtual work environment, right? This is that time where you're purposely setting up just some virtual times where it's unscripted, all those kind of things, because those spaces allowed people to build trust based on what they know about you, not the mask that you put in front of them. And so that's the other chunk of time that I would say leaders need to spend working on.
And I think that's so important to be researching and, following market trends. I'm sure it's something that you do in your job as well. Something I do is I'm reading leadership books all the time, or listening to podcasts, or watching other people's TikTok videos, because I'm like, what are people talking about?
Right.
What is important? What is the future? Is there a new idea for how we train our leaders to be better executives and managers and strategists? And I think what starts to happen in a corporate world is almost you get comfortable in the space you operate. Right? Like, especially if you follow a pretty linear career path, which a lot of people do, where like I started in entry level marketing, then I was a campaign manager, then I was a VP of marketing, now I'm a CMO. You start to kind of feel like you know it all. And I feel like it's that humble attitude that like, I want to learn, I want to know what's next, I want to lean into that put Blockbuster out of business. Right? Like, you can't do that if you're not paying attention.
Right. There's this weird phenomenon. I've been researching it. I've got more stuff that's coming out soon, but there's this weird phenomenon where you get dumber as you get older, which doesn't make any sense, right? So, as you gain experience, you should be getting smarter, but people don't. That's not the trajectory, right? They become more rigid. They become more fossilized. It's literally, I don't have an exact term for it. I've been doing a lot of different research, but the way I describe it is it's the fossilization of your leadership. And so it's you becoming stone. It's you going from an organism that can adapt, change, and grow into this fossilized version of yourself where you can only spit out the same talking points you've been saying for the past 10 years. And it's all like you hit the word, it's all about humility, right? It's at the end of the day that I haven't stopped, that I'm actually not the smartest person in the room, that I have more questions than I have more answers. But that's a choice you make. It's not dependent on your experience. And that's what's crazy is like, you can have a huge experience. You can have this massive, I don't know where you are on your faith journey and different stuff like that, but in my faith and my background is church world and all that kind of stuff. So I use that language a lot. And the story that's always fascinating me is Solomon, who starts his career as the wisest person on earth. Right. And then ends his career as the dumbest king that they ever had.
Yep.
Right. It's weird, this whole journey that they go on. And this happens so many times. And it's because of the choices that you make across the board. And so I could dive deep on that. We could go on, but it's all in how you wake up in the morning. It really matters there.
Yeah, I think we'll definitely have to have you back for a follow-up session to talk about this once your research is a little more, framed. Because when I think about it, how many times have I sat in a room? I used to joke, I worked for a company that was very buzzword oriented, and not the traditional corporatees that we all use. They would like make them up. And they were specific just to that company. Like they meant nothing anywhere else in the world. They were like company specific buzzwords. And the first time you hear it, you're like, what? That doesn't make any sense. Why would we say that? No. And then you get so used to it that you start saying it. And then 10 years down the road, I would hear people I used to work with mention it in a call. And I'm like, no, okay, we have to leave that. At some point, that's got to go to bed and you got to learn something new. We cannot be focused on the same buzzword we talked about 10 years ago. And I do think that like you get into a rigor, right? I've been managing teams for almost a decade. And now I feel like the corporate world is starting to personalize more to personality. Right? I manage different people differently in order to play to their strengths and their personality type. But I remember when I first became a manager, everybody's like, just give them their requirements and go. Just tell them what to do. And if you're not evolving, if you're not learning new leadership techniques, and you're still the type of leader who just says, go do it because I said so, you're not going to last long nowadays, right?
No. Yeah, you'll end up, this is the big thing, right? This is the quiet quitting world that we're living in.
Yeah.
And it was a great resignation. Now it's quiet quitting. And at the end of the day, talent is only going to get more scarce. Like it's only going to get harder to find people from here. There's to really kind of dump you into the future a little bit. There's a guy named Peter Zeihan. I don't know if you've ever heard this name. Do you listen to Joe Rogan at all?
I do. Yeah.
Okay. Got it. All right. So we're talking about population collapse, right? So you're talking in 50 years, right? The leaders in 50 years from now will have a third less of the workforce available to them than we do today, right?
Yeah.
Across the board in different places like that. So you have to get personalized, right? You have to be thinking in those terms, that the people that you have, what does it mean for you to have people that you're going to have their whole career in one spot, getting back to that spot? What would make them attractive to do that? Well, it's all about giving them control, letting them think, letting them decide for different things like that. And there's a great book your listeners ought to grab. It's called Joy at Work. It's written by the former CEO of AES, Dennis Back, and his whole thing was about how to make a employee-driven organization. So what does it mean? So what he would do, one example is, this is energy companies. They would go in and buy factories like power plants, and they would come in and they would turn the entire budgeting process over to the line workers. So completely eliminating levels of management and say, all right, line workers, here's your budget based off your income. You guys decide how much you get paid. You decide what expenses to go from there as a group, collectively from there. And you would have these factories that had been unionized for 75, 80 years, old factories, power plants, that kind of thing. And all of a sudden they de-unionize because now they can have control. They don't need it anymore. They've got all the control that they need. They run better. They're happier. Their production outputs and stuff. And so that's the future of what leadership really is when we talk about this new dynamic of keeping everybody together. And so it's a great way. It's great to hear people starting to think about that and tailor their management towards it.
Yeah. And I think, I feel like every generation looks at the next generation as like, you just don't want to work, right? Like I hear that all the time on social media. People are like, millennials don't want to work. Gen Z doesn't want to work. Gen X barely works at all. Right. And I think the reality that I'm seeing is that each new generation has higher humanity expectations rather than work, right? Whereas I think the mentality that it's your job, just get it done, you got to eat, this is how you eat, has kind of gone away. And now it's like, maybe I'd rather starve, right? If this is the only option, maybe I'd rather starve. And what does that look like? So I think it's pushing leadership to have to be employee first, right? Yep. You have to give them what they need to be successful. Now, even within that, not everybody will be successful.
No. Yeah.
Right. Because not everybody has the autonomy to drive their career forward, to build that, that skill set that's going to be valuable. But you have to give them the tools and the opportunity to do it themselves, because managers can no longer just write the job rec, stick you in it, leave you for 50 years and hope for the best.
Right. And, and part of it, and I step on this landmine a lot. And part of it is you have to give people what they need, not just what they want, right? Yes. So they'll tell you, I want more vacation time. I want greater raises. I want, blah, 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 all this different stuff. And those are great things. I'm not telling you to not give people those kinds of things. But what they need is purpose, right? And this is where we go back to the myth of the startup, where people are working for pennies, working 100 hours a week, right? Because they have a purpose. And so being a purpose-driven leader, right? And that's not mean that you're not meeting their wants, giving people career paths, giving people raises, all that stuff is great. But when you can tie it to a purpose, when you say you got this because you are accomplishing your purpose, because this purpose is tied to, a bigger thing that we're all working together, that's how you get people for 50 years. Because, at the end of the day, there's only so much raising you can do, right? Let's say they made it all the way up to the CEOs. They still turn over, right? They still go out and find other different places unless they're deeply invested and tied into a spot right there.
Yeah. I spent a lot of my career in product management and tech development. And we talk a lot about wants versus needs in product design, because when you think of like using Facebook as an example, most people understand, if you went to somebody and said, hey, what would you change about Facebook? Right? Maybe like, oh, I wish I could sell things on Facebook more easily. I wish I could, see grandma's birthday pop up and remind me, right? They say those types of things, and those things are nice to have. But what they really want is to know what's going on in people's lives without having to make any effort. That's what they need from Facebook, right? That's the need that Facebook filled, was low effort socialization.
Right.
And if you asked 1 million people, nobody's going to say, I want to be able to creep on people without them knowing and have tons of information socially with zero effort. People don't think that way. And so solving a need is very different a lot of times than just soliciting feedback, because people won't always tell you what they need, because a lot of the time they don't know. Instead, they'll tell you the things they think they want, and you have to turn that into something that's really valuable. And I think that purpose statement is a great one. What is your purpose for going to work? What's your purpose for staying at work? Right? Friday comes along, keeping you from saying, there are other jobs out there, right? How do you keep that engagement? And, at the executive level, they set the tone, and that carries down, right? Now they're responsible for hiring the right people under them that are going to carry forth that message as well. But if an executive can't state the purpose of their division, that can't always be driven bottoms up, right? You can't have somebody who's an entry-level position say, hey, well, I think our purpose is this, and it take over the company. Like, that is a very, very rare occurrence. And so you've got to have that top of house leadership.
Right. One of the most dangerous questions that you could ask somebody when they come to you and ask you for a raise is why. And this is something that, I've gotten, sorry, HR people for it's not, and not why. And what I always tell you is like, well, I've done this hard work, I've done all this different stuff, and I was like, no, that's the justification for me to give you a raise, which I agree with, and I'm going to lobby everything. What are you going to do with it? What are you going to do with that extra money? Now, some people may say that's none of your business. I can do whatever I want to with my money. Absolutely. What I'm trying to understand as leaders, where are you going with your life? And how can I not just give you the money, but give you the opportunity to realize that direction for your life?
Yeah.
Because if you say, hey, I want to, I want more money so that my kids can have a better career. Okay. Can I give you more work-life balance so you can be with them? Right. So now it's not just the raise, but now you can spend more time with them. Daycare's gotten up. All right. How can we change? There's 100 different things. And until, like you said, until you get to those root actual needs, it doesn't matter how many wants you meet. You're still going to have the turnover from there.
And it's funny. I don't want to use this word discourage because that's dramatic, but I often discourage my clients from asking for a raise if it doesn't justify a promotion that takes them in the direction that they want. Right. And I'm not saying that companies don't underpay and that you need more money for your life and your lifestyle. Absolutely.
For sure.
But if you're looking to progress your career, raises should come with stepping into that next level and that scope. And that's where I think people get stuck, because they're so hesitant to say, I want to be a manager. And they think, well, if I'm just good at my job, my manager will know. Well, plenty of people don't want to be managers, right? The only way your leaders know that you want to become an executive is if you tell them, I want to be an executive. And I reference this all the time with clients. My first job out of college, I was brought in to interview for this Fortune 500 company, right? I have zero experience, none. I know nothing. And they had like a power day, right? Where you're in interviews for like 6 hours, and they had a lunch in the middle. And this guy comes in during the lunch and he's like, oh, I just wanted to meet the new recruits. And you're like, oh, great. And he goes, what do you think of our company strategy? And he's going around the room and everybody's like, brilliant, so smart, great. And they got to me and I was like, I think you guys are making a horrible mistake. You're going to lose like half of your end customer, but I think it'd be a really good learning opportunity. And he asked what I wanted to do in my career. And I said, I want to be a CFO. And he said, how convenient. I am one. You now work for me. And hired me on the spot in that lunch to work for him with no management levels between. So my first job out of college, now I'm working for the CFO. I have no idea what I'm doing. Right.
Love it.
But I had to ask. Right. And you have to have that ownership of like, where do you want to go? I want to be a CFO. Great. Here's how you get to CFO. But if you don't have, and it doesn't always have to be a role, it could be a purpose. Like, I want to be able to deliver this. I want to be able to build this. But if you don't have that, it's really hard to know what you need to do. And it's hard to get your manager to advocate for you because they don't know either.
Exactly. And I've been on the other side of that coin too, where you're looking at a person that you're like paying them at the top of their salary range. You've given them you've literally spent 3 years giving them everything they've ever asked for. And then they're still handing in their resignation. You're like, what happened? Why? I gave you everything you asked. Why are you leaving me? And it's because you didn't give them what they actually needed, which is the career, which is the purpose, which is the validation, the respect, the trust, the control over their future. I mean, I think that's the thing. you know, I've literally watched executives, as we talked about this, squirm in their chair, not at adding 20% to somebody's salary, but by giving them control over a series of decision making. They would
Yeah.
rather pay you 20, 30% more for your salary and not give you the control because for whatever reason, it's all internal, different stuff like that. But that's the power, right? And that's kind of the, I don't know, that's what you should be going for more if you're advancing your career. And if you're an executive and you want to keep top level talent, that's the real reward that you need to be giving to your talent.
Yeah. And it's interesting hearing you say it. It sounds so obvious. Like, of course you should empower your people to have control over what they're doing in their careers. Like, yes, but I can think of many times in my own professional history where I wasn't given that. And I can think of executives I've worked with where if I asked for that, they may have actually had a heart attack and keeled over. Like it would just not have been an acceptable request. So it's so interesting. Like I can see that that would make an executive leader so much more successful.
Right, right. And it's the most empowering. I mean, you think about it, the greatest people you worked for, right? You think about your favorite bosses. Wasn't what they paid you, it was what they let you do.
Yes, 100%.
And that's when you start thinking in terms of like that, how can I give you more fun things to do? So I just absorbed a new department within our university for my day job of a different part of it. And there's a guy, he works and he's been doing it for 3 or 4 years. He's an instructional designer, but he does quality control is what he does on the backside of it. So he knows everything about how to do the design process, but he's never actually made a course. So we're trying to make this new type of course. And it came to him and he goes, hey, can I do the normal quality control check on this new type of course? And I said, no, I don't want you to do the quality control check. I want you to make me the most mind-blowing course that you think you can make. And all of a sudden I watched his eyes light up. He's like, I get to make a course. I'm like, yes, you've been doing quality control. I know you know what a good course looks like. And I know you know these toys and all the systems better than anybody else on the team. I want you to take this course and I want you to make it into your dream course, however you want to do it. No other direction from there. And so the last 2 weeks, he's been sending me updates nonstop. I've done this. I discovered this new thing we didn't know that the thing could do. Giving people control, letting them run with what they want to do. And it's powerful.
And it definitely feeds into their passions too, right? Which is great. So this conversation has been awesome. It's been so great getting to chat with you. I'd love to hear, what are any parting words for our executive leaders, our aspiring executive leaders? What would you want to share with the listeners?
Yeah. I mean, I think to wrap it all up, to sum it all up, again, it's you got to live in the future, right? So if you want to be an executive leader, start by living in the future. What that means is people might not appreciate what you say right off the bat. You might have to find another spot where people can appreciate it. But the more you become the person who's living in the future, the more people will begin to trust you to make decisions for that future. And when people are trusting you to make decisions for that future, then you're in senior leadership, right? Then you start evolving and start naturally pulling it towards there. So that's the part of it there. And if you're an executive, you can do that same process to keep your top level talent. Let them shape the future of the company, and you just guide them and coach them along the way. So those are the two ways of looking at the same coin that really makes it worth it to get out of bed in the morning.
I love it. Well, and you've been bringing such an interesting perspective to the call today, to the podcast. We love to learn from individuals who are not just successful in their own careers and in their own right, which I feel like is so important, but also somebody who's, willing to share their words of wisdom and really help the listeners start to progress the way that they want to or be successful where they're at. So it's been awesome having you on today. We will definitely have to have you back, but I appreciate all of your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Kendall. Appreciate it. And love connecting. It's always fun hanging out with people that we have a great time with on TikTok. So it's
Gotta love it.
There. Yep. Love
Awesome.
it. Thank you.